welcome back. And we're moving into our first conversation for today as we're joined by International and Regional Liaison of the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. We have Carlos Fuller on set with us. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to start off with a broader conversation, looking at the development since COP21. Let's just talk about what has been happening. We herald the achievement in Paris, and as you prepare to head into COP22, what are some of the things that you can reflect on?
Indeed, this has been a very exciting year for the climate change and the response to climate change, in the sense that in Paris, we came up with a landmark agreement that all countries now recognize that we have to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that we need to take action right away. So that was unprecedented. Mm-hmm. It followed up with 175 leaders meeting in New York at the UN Secretary General's Summit, where they signed the agreement. Mm-hmm. Then in September, we had enough countries had signed and ratified the instrument that it has now come into force. It is unprecedented. Never has a major agreement, international agreement, come into force so quickly. That is, you had at least 55 countries which represent at least 55% of the global emissions have actually ratified it, passed it into their national laws, including Belize and 10 other CARICOM countries. Again, unprecedented. We had several other major meetings also that address the issue of climate change. ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, passed an agreement that they will address climate change, because right now international emissions are not a part of any reduction agreement. They have agreed to offset it. The Montreal Protocol passed the Kigali amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which addresses the hydrofluorocarbons that address the ozone layer, but also were impacting on climate change. Again, another major agreement to address climate change. And just this past week, the International Maritime Organization have begun work on how they address emissions from shipping, which again was not regulated under any mechanism. So we have all these major agreements coming into play, and so the political momentum is still there.
Yes.
Let's go back a bit and discuss what is actually climate change. For those people who have heard buzzwords being used, I personally can recall as a teen global warming as one of those, El Nino, the depletion of the ozone layer, and what have you. Can you speak to us now in terms of what is climate change and its actual effects that we can see, for instance, here in Belize?
Certainly. We know climate has always been changing. However, historically, that has been a natural change and very slow as a result of shifts of the distance of the Earth from the Sun. And so that's a very, very slow process. However, from about the past 150 years, we have seen an accelerated warming of the Earth's temperature. And in fact, temperatures in the past 150 years have risen by 1 degree Celsius. Now that might seem insignificant. However, when that is globally, when you look at the more regional aspects, that increase is much more significant. So we used to call it global warming because we used to address only one parameter, that is that slight increase, that gradual increase we're seeing over the years. However, embedded in that gradual increase, you have a lot of fluctuations. Yeah. So many days of high temperatures followed by low temperatures, more severe weather events, more intense rainfall events. And so all of these things, we have to recognize that we can't speak about only one parameter. There are many things, and that is the issue of climate change. Your natural climate is changing. That is the start of your rainy season, the length of your dry season, the more frequent droughts you have, the more intense rainfall. So to capture everything, we have said, guess what, let's not only focus on the warming, but let us look at the overall picture, including sea level rise. So those are the things that we really have to look at. The issue of the ozone layer indeed is another issue which we have been able to address very well because it had to do with the depletion of the ozone layer, primarily near the poles, the Antarctic and the Arctic. And that was really caused by man-made emissions from freon, from coolants, from propellants in sprays, and we have been able to regulate that. So we are actually seeing that the ozone layer is actually getting is closing.
Yeah.
So mankind can do something when it has created a problem, and we're saying we need to do the same thing about climate change.
Now, it seems that, Isani is right, because in the beginning we perhaps didn't speak as much about climate change as we do now. And in the initial phase, when there was a lot of research being done, some even suggested that this was all a hoax, that this was a way to be able to get funding into certain projects and whatnot. But it has become such a regular part of the conversation. We look at the United States elections and how climate change is one of the factors that they keep on debating as well. And I think that with COP21, we definitely hear the continuous momentum. If you were to say, what are some of the reasons why people are now more accepting? If I'm to reflect on some of the things that we've seen worldwide, we hear record-breaking all the time, record-breaking drought, record-breaking storm, record-breaking something regarding especially weather systems. Do you think that that's part of the reason why people can now say, okay, something is different about our environment and maybe this climate change thing is real?
In fact, I think that has a big role to play in it. I mean, there were certain islands, in particular the small islands in the Pacific, who were almost the canary birds. They were seeing it, 10, 20 years ago, and that is why they raised the hue and the cry. And they got the international community to start to address the issue. And of course, there were those who were not feeling that impact, saying, what in the world are these people talking about?
Yeah.
We've always had this little change. But now, across the US, you're seeing hurricanes hitting New York, which they had never seen before. They're seeing wildfires like crazy in California, Nevada, and so on, things that they had never seen before, flooding in New Orleans. So all of these things are affecting areas that had never had these great variations in climate. And so it has resonated indeed. And also more and more scientific evidence is coming in and justifying what had been proposed earlier. And so we are seeing that the naysayers are actually joining and say, guess what, I am now convinced and I'm joining in.
Yeah.
And we had this international coming together of religious leaders, of politicians, of celebrities, everybody joining into it. And I think so it really propelled this momentum forward to see that we are actually addressing it now.
Now, from the perspective of the 5 Cs, what are we doing regionally to be able to raise awareness and take steps to either limit our footprint when it comes to either carbon emissions or what have you?
Well, in fact, I will go back 10 years ago when the CARICOM heads of government actually said, yes, we needed a regional response to climate change.
Yeah.
And so actually created the Climate Change Center, which again, a major political initiative on the part of our CARICOM heads of government and heads of state. Since that time, we have been implementing projects to the value of some 30 to 40 million US dollars across the region to address both issues. We recognize that our carbon footprint in the Caribbean is very small. We are producing less than 100 to 1% of the global emissions. So we are not the cause of climate change. But we are feeling the impacts of climate change far more than most other regions. And so we try to adapt to climate change. So one of the areas that we recognized very early was the whole issue of water. Yes, climate change affects all the sectors, whether it's tourism, agriculture, health, and so on, but water is at the core of it. And if you can address water, you will then see less impacts on health, on tourism, on agriculture, and so on. So that is where we have been pushing most of our efforts on. So we have put in desalination plants in St. Vincent, in Grenada, assisted the government of Belize in actually converting the plant out in Key Cocker, putting in solar panels there to then reduce their use of fossil fuels in powering these plants. So we are addressing water at that level. We're also looking at the tourism sector, actually going in and modifying a hotel so that they are using less water again in the hotel industry. We have adapted the building code in St. Lucia to get it ready for stronger hurricanes and actually then use that building code to retrofit a hurricane shelter they have there. So we're doing all of these interventions to show that you can actually do concrete measures on the ground while we're addressing the impacts of climate change. And that is the kind of work we're doing, and in fact continue to do for the next, I guess, 10, 20 years. We need to continue to do the adaptation to climate change.
Now, on a personal level, you've been involved with climate change research for a very long time. Can you speak as to what the shift at this time, the shift in momentum or shift in strategies is like for those who are a part of the scientific community? For so long, you'd been trying to prove, you'd been trying to calculate what the potential damage would be. And now we actually have the political buy-in where a lot of the research and the strategies that you've already formalized can now be put into effect.
Well, in fact, but that's an area that we really need to do much more work in. That is, the international community has always looked at climate change, looking at various scenarios. Well, if the emissions are this, we're talking about 4 degrees, 6 degrees, 8 degrees, some 2 degrees, and very little at 1.5. And we're saying, but for us to stay alive at 1.5, let's do the research at 1.5. So we are pushing all the efforts right now. Yes, we now have the political momentum to 2 degrees and maybe even 1.5. But the policymakers are saying, but we don't have data on 1.5. So we said, well, guess what? Let us do the research to see what will happen at 1.5 to show you why we need to keep it at 1.5. So we are doing that momentum right now. We have convinced the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to prepare a special report by 2018 on that issue. So we are now getting the international scientific community look at what the impacts on the regions are going to be at 1.5, so that we can then say, you see, this is what we mean, that is why we have to keep...
Since that is the goal, you want to find out all the scenarios that will take place around that.
Exactly, and then how we can achieve it. Because there's also the pushback by industry. Look, we are talking about some major cuts to get to 1.5. We're saying, well, let us see what we're talking about. If it does include new technologies, we have to develop new technology. If we have to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to do it, then we have to do it, because we're talking about people's lives, countries. I mean, some states may not even exist above 1.5 or even 1.5.
COP22 in Morocco is a convergence of minds in terms of the people who are at the forefront of this particular issue, raising awareness, bringing together new ideas and what have you. Is there any specific focus in your mind that will be the discussion to be held in Morocco?
Well, in fact, I would say it's going to be in two areas. First, it's because the Paris Agreement will come into effect on the 4th of November. Of course, it's going to be a major political issue, because it's 30 days after the 55 countries came in. So that will occur on the 4th of November. So the Moroccan president has invited heads of state and of government to assemble in Marrakesh to mark this historic occasion. So it's going to be a major political showcase. Secondly, the Moroccan presidency is looking at this as the implementation COP. Yes, in Paris we had the policy. Now we need to do the implementation, and so we now need to develop the rule book.
Yeah.
Paris created many. This is defined. This is established. So on. We now have to say, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot of work. We will not complete it in Morocco, but we're going to begin the process there. So that is really where the focus is going to be on. How do we get everybody, the technicians, to sit down together and actually write that rule book to then have everything in place for the next 2 or 3 years to begin the implementation of it. There are two specific areas that the presidency in Morocco wants to do. First, to address the issue of Africa. Food security is a major problem in Africa, and that they see that as one of the big pushes they want to make in Marrakesh. And the second one has to do with the issue of climate finance. We recognize that all the countries of the world have to address climate change from both adaptation and mitigation. But many of us have other issues that we have to deal with at home. Poverty alleviation, health issues, and the things that we need to solve this year and 5 years from now. Climate change is long term.
Yeah.
So we need to begin now, and we need the the financial resources, the capacity building, the technology to do it. At this COP, we're hoping that the international community is also going to address how do we raise the funding for countries like Belize, the Caribbean, to actually work on climate change.
And in terms of results of COP21, we know that the financing issue is definitely, it has been and will continue to be a large part of the conversation. Who pays for the adaptations? Who pays for the mitigation of the effects? Should the regions like the Caribbean, who are feeling more of the effects but not contributing as much to the problem, take on the expenses of adapting our own infrastructures and to be able to cope with these effects that will come? Let's talk about where we are, and I know that you had spoken after returning from Paris about the strength of the Caribbean community in terms of being able to ensure that protection for the region and financing for the region would be secured.
Yes, so that is indeed the big question. And in fact, the Paris Agreement said developed countries shall provide. So indeed, the target is right now at least $100 billion per year by the year 2020. We have a report that was commissioned, and in fact, the lead authors were the governments of Australia and the United Kingdom, showing that how far they are right now towards that goal. And that paper will be presented at COP22 to say, this is how far where we are, and this is where we're projecting it to be by 2020. So indeed, we are now actually getting the numbers, seeing how it is being, how the finance is being mobilized. Indeed, the CARICOM countries played a major role in contributing to the success in Paris. We have tried to keep that going. We had a meeting in Grenada in September, bringing all the negotiators and ministers together to strategize how we are going to address the issue. In Morocco, a very successful meeting we had. And I think so our leaders are now prepared to go there to continue that engagement, to say, yes, this is where we are, this is where we were, this is where we are now, and this is how we are proposing that we move forward. So I think we are in a position to continue that engagement. Despite the fact that we've had some changes of government. I think we had like 3 changes of government, but the new ministers have come in, have been briefed. And so, yes, I feel very confident that at the ministerial level, we'll be ready to continue this process.
From a different point of view, can we as smaller countries or as developing countries bring pressure to bear on some of the larger, more established countries that have a larger carbon footprint, for instance? Let's say if you look at a scenario where you have China and then you have a small country such as Belize or the region, the Caribbean region, asking for either more input from the Chinese people to be able to kind of reduce the amount that they're putting out so that we on this part of the world aren't as affected?
Yes, I think we are. Probably not as much with China right now.
Just an example.
Yeah, but there are others who have recognized that it is becoming a national security issue for them. And so unless they address things beyond their borders, it's going to come up to the borders. So in fact, the European Union has recognized that the issues of that mass migration, where climate change played a significant role in Libya, in Ethiopia, because of the major droughts. People were moving out because of a lack of water, creating conflicts and then moving out. The US has actually recognized the same thing is going to occur. If it's Central America, we have a problem, and South America and the Caribbean, you're going to have more and more migration out of the more vulnerable areas. So they recognize we have to address the problem down there before it gets up here. And so let us begin that process of engagement. We've also moved to a world of decarbonization. That is to say, yes, we will continue to develop, but we will not depend that much on petroleum, and we'll try to reduce our use of that as much as possible, because that is the major cause of climate change. So again, it then means that you have to develop the technologies, and one country alone cannot develop the technology. We may have issues, we may have resources here in Belize that we can use. How do we access that? For example, the country in the world that uses the most solar power is Germany. Yet they only have on the average of 6 hours of sunlight a day. We have 12. Obviously, we're supposed to be far way ahead of them in the use of solar power, you know, around the world. So this is the kind of thing that we need to explore.
That's an interesting observation.
And I think that's one of the key points that I wanted to look at. How do we make climate change a regular part of the conversation for everyday persons? You're absolutely right when you were talking about climate financing and looking at the real social issues that are taking place within countries, and whether or not people can be able to buy in or recognize why particular investments need to be done, why technological changes need to be done. In other words, if we were to push for solar panel use in Belize, will we have shacks with solar panels? And is that a worthwhile investment?
Right, yeah.
So from your perspective, what needs to be done to really drive the point home to the everyday person that yes, by all means, take care of your housing and your food needs, but still know that there is a long-term perspective that has to be put in place?
You're quite right. And the whole issue that it has to be addressed holistically. It is not one area. You have to look at everything, and everything contributes that little bit towards either reducing your carbon footprint or getting ready for climate change.
Yeah.
One of the tools that we have developed at the center is called CCCCC. That is the Caribbean Climate Online Risk Assessment Tool. That anything you do, you should look at it through a climate lens. How is your acquiring a piece of property going to be influenced by climate change in the future? That is, yes, you know, you get a piece of property, you're probably going to have to take out a mortgage. It's going to probably take you 20, 30 years to pay off that mortgage. What is that property going to look like in 20 or 30 years from now? Look at it through that way.
Okay.
That is it, and you've got, sea level rise, you're talking about a little bit, every year.
Yeah.
But in 20 years,
Yeah.
so maybe this piece of land is not the best place to put it, whether it is in a little valley or it's along the seashore, then maybe that's not what I should be doing. And the same thing we're telling the financial sector. When you go and you lend money to a farmer, for example, and he's planting in an area that gets flooded once every 2 years, and every 4 years gets a drought, how likely am I going to get back that money from this farmer that I've lent this money to develop his plantation? Maybe I should talk to him and tell him, maybe that's not the best land. I want to lend you this money, but shift over. And the insurance industry, again, if I am taking too many losses because of where you have been building, maybe I should not be insuring it. And if I don't insure it, then maybe he won't build there and he'll build somewhere else where it's unlikely he's going to be affected, and I'm going to collect from him every year. So by looking at things that way.
It's called what? The CCCCC?
CCCCC, yes.
Okay, so you be your CCCCC for Belize. And you provide some perspective as to what 1.5, if the targets are met for 1.5, means for Belize.
Well, in fact, at the moment, globally, temperatures have already risen by 1 degree. And we are now seeing a lot more erosion than we had ever seen before. We are seeing coral bleaching occurring on a regular basis. And we know that at 1.5, we only have about maybe a 30 or 40% chance that it will revive. At 2 degrees, the coral is dead.
Wow.
If the sea coral is dead, you don't have a fishing industry. So we don't have fish. And which tourist is going to come to see a white wall?
Yeah.
So your tourism industry is in trouble. We are seeing crazy shifts in our seasons, where our mango trees don't seem to know when they're supposed to be blossoming and giving mango.
Yeah.
So we're seeing all these shifts in flowering and so on. We're seeing a lot more droughts. We have seen corn being affected on a regular basis now. So we're seeing all these impacts on our agriculture, on our water resources. Well, in fact, even water, again, we're seeing many more times of the year where we have to be providing water, barging water, and so on. I see in Barbados right now, they're actually considering barging water from Suriname to Barbados.
Wow.
To prepare for the next dry season. So we're seeing these impacts already, and at 1.5 it's going to be much more severe than we ever saw before. And in fact, as a country, we are more at risk because of our population is increasing. We saw the impacts of only a Category 1 hurricane on Belize City only a few months ago. So imagine if you see a Category 3 in 5 years from now, a larger Belize City, more people at risk. The impacts there are going to be even more severe.
You've continuously talked as well, and we know you've definitely, the community has definitely sounded the alarm on the rise in sea levels and the effects on Belize City. And we've spoken several times with those who now do policy and planning, especially for the city, about trying to move a bit more inland. Can we talk about that just once more?
No, certainly. Belize City is a wonderful place to live. I was born and I grew up here. But when you look at Belize City from an area point of view, it is a delta sticking out into the sea, extremely flat. Because it is made up of organic material, it is also sinking while the sea level is rising. We are at risk. And obviously we have a lot of land as we go further inland. And we have a natural ridge after you pass about mile 10 on the highway, where you get up and you're now in relatively a safe zone from sea level rise and even from a storm surge that would come in from a hurricane. So indeed, I think that is where our focus has to be. In the 60s, we developed Belmopan, and it took us 2 or 3 decades to get people to convince to actually start to, to live in Belmopan. And so I think that is going to have to be the what we have to address. I agree with the planners totally. The biggest issue we have to address is proper planning.
Yeah.
If we were to address proper planning, our vulnerability would be reduced significantly. You know what is the best lands for agriculture, then you don't live in where you have agricultural lands. You know the best lands to maintain your watersheds. So the FCD, we have to commend them. Yes, you need to preserve your forests because you're getting then good fresh water into your rivers to feed agriculture, municipal supplies, and so on. And then for the cities, you need to know this is where you need to build near a water supply, but with reduced risk of flooding and storm surge. So let's develop those areas. But of course, you need to then keep your little municipalities going, because that is what makes Belize, a Danguiga, a Corozal, Belize City, Punta Gorda.
Yeah.
In a sense, wouldn't it be what we call practice after race? Simply because there wasn't really much urban planning at the time when these particular municipalities were being developed. Now we're looking back and trying to find a better fit. So it's almost as if though we're working retroactively to solve certain issues that should have been taken into consideration. Granted, climate change wasn't the topic of discussion back in the 60s when Belmopan was being established, for instance. How do we look at those scenarios and work our way back to take corrective measures?
Well, in fact, if you look back, yes, Belize City and those areas developed because of the logging industry, and I mean it made sense at the time. But we also built the houses for that time period. So our houses were built on stilts.
Right.
There was no air conditioning. We had high ceilings. Wind could come in. We had lots of windows and doors, and we lived in harmony with nature. Over the years, we have decided, well, I could board up downstairs, and so
have more space.
Exactly. So I board downstairs, but then no, we have more flooding. We decided, well, we don't need to waste all this space. Let's lower it. We can buy ACs, and we sort of shifted the natural way that we were living in harmony with nature. It's to bring that back, right?
Yeah.
And also to recognize that, yes, Belize City had some high areas, and we had some areas with mangroves. We should have kept those mangroves because that is where the water went when we had high water. Once you filled it up, where will the water go? Except on our streets and back into our yards and into our things. So it's how do you rebuild back what we did very well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because something immediately comes to mind. The issue of Crewman Lagoon, for instance, as a natural catchment. You have people who are settling in that area, and in essence it displaces where the water would have collected when you have excess rainfall.
That's
or what
right,
have you.
Yes, and in fact, and that is the issue. These are people with limited resources. They are going to go to anywhere where they can see a piece of land. Obviously, to me, that is where the planner and the policymakers have got to say, look, don't go there. I will provide you with better land.
Yeah.
Because if you go into that very bad area, you're going to have a problem with water, you're going to have a problem with health, and all the issues that you already have limited resources. You're probably going to spend more than half of your time now in doctors' waiting rooms with your children because of where you're living.
Yeah.
So yes, we need to provide them with better living places where they can indeed put up a substantial house and not having to, go into a swamp use garbage to reclaim the swamp and that kind of thing. Yes.
And that's part of the climate change lens that you keep on speaking about,
Exactly.
even for the everyday person if they
Yeah.
decide to squat in an area like that.
And if you look at it from a macro point of view, the more you put in early investment in some place good, then it is less the government has to spend into keeping a hospital going, providing health services, that they would have to do it anyhow because of the limited resources of these people.
So I know quite a few people are happy to hear that you recommend once again house on stilts. But in the Caribbean, they are trying to push for that as well.
Yes, however, I think we are probably in a better position because of the amount of land we have, whereas when you're in some hilly areas and limited resources.
Yes. Now let's just wrap up the conversation in terms of what is on the agenda for COP22 from the Belize perspective or Caribbean perspective.
As I said, we did have that meeting in Grenada, and we went into the areas that we really needed to address. So, for example, climate finance was a big one that we had to recognize. This report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is going to feed into a review of how the Paris Agreement is being implemented. So again, that's an area that we want to make sure that is maintained on the agenda. We have a proper review so that we can actually see what countries are doing, which is what we are going to recognize as these reports that countries have to submit. They prepare these national NDCs, nationally appropriate targets for each country. So they have got to show us now, how are they implementing it? Are they achieving what they said they will do? And will each country's contribution add up to keeping temperatures below 1.5? If it doesn't, then we need to be able to push them to say, well, everybody needs to do some more. And this was really a bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
We never said, okay, guys, this is what you need to do. Tell us what you can do, and together you all agree that this is the lane, this is the mark. If we're not meeting it, then let's everybody push up. Okay. Who can do more, needs to do more, and so on. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us once again. The COP22 is going to be
in Marrakesh from the 7th to the 18th of November.
All right.
Next week, Monday.
And then we'll get the update when you come back.
Of course.
All right. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Zani.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be shifting to talk about accessing healthcare services for HIV/AIDS. So that's going to be the second part of our show. We'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.